everyone. Adam here, So What's Your Podcast? I'm sitting down with Ethan Beigel, who is a supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer. Ethan, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
I guess the place to start would be, what exactly does supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer mean?
Okay, yeah. So there's two branches of post-production sound, meaning sound that isn't what's being recorded on set. And I don't know if you remember, until very recently in the Oscars, there were always two categories. There was a sound editing category and a sound mixing category. So what those two divisions do is the sound editing is the collection and creation and preparation of all non-musical sounds that you hear in a TV show or a movie. So all the dialogue that's recorded on set, any of the footsteps or gunshots or door slams, any of the weird bangs and tones and sound design things that you might know of, that all gets created and selected and curated really from a bunch of different sources and prepared by the sound editing team. So we'll record a bunch of stuff on our own. We will take pre-recorded sounds out of sound effects libraries. The dialogue is, of course, recorded on set. We will re-record other dialogue that we need, whether it's new lines or lines where they don't sound very good because of whatever conditions were on set made the recordings not great. And we'll do all this stuff to prepare and lay out all of these sounds. And then we send them to the mixers. And the re-recording mixers are the people who then take all of these sounds along with the music that comes from the composer, and they will balance them all up against each other into what is ultimately the final product on the movie that you hear. The analogy that I like to use is, if you think we're in a kitchen of a restaurant, the editing is the prep chefs who do all the mise en place, do all the shopping for the groceries and everything, and then the mixers are the ones who actually cook the food and put it on a plate for you.
Okay. Yeah, it's a really interesting job. It's very cool. But it seems exhausting. like how deep it must go.
It goes really deep, especially at the level that I think people are accustomed to with movies and major network television shows. There's a lot of detail work that goes into it. We scrub through every single line and every word of dialogue that's spoken, and we cover and record every footstep that somebody walks, and even like hand pats, like somebody touches you on the shoulder, you'll hear that. Somebody rubs their hands through their hair, you'll hear that. So we cover everything that could possibly make a sound in that particular scene, and we do it for the whole show or the whole movie.
And part of that job, I'm sure, would have to be to make sure those kind of sound effects are loud enough you hear them, but not so loud that it's overpowering or distracting.
Right. And and then the job, so as the supervising sound editor, my team collects and records those sounds, and then the mixers make sure that those play at a volume that makes sense and feels real to the audience.
Is it ever kind of a struggle where you're doing a scene, like you actually gave the analogy of a kitchen, but a kitchen's kind of a great example for this, with you could have the burners going and the background talking and footsteps and door slamming and, on and on and on and on. Is there a point where you kind of have to draw a line, or do you just have to dissect every last thing?
No, there's absolutely, like, you can only hear so many things. I think it was, I hope I'm not attributing this, but I think it was Walter Murch who said you could only hear two or three things at once before it starts to become mud. And so, while in most cases we have everything available, yes, we don't always play things. So what you won't notice, but if you're listening for it, you will. If you have a scene, for example, that say it takes place out in the woods, and we're walking through the woods, you'll hear the dialogue, and you might hear the feet on the grass and the dirt, and you'll hear whatever ambient background wood sounds, some wind, some birds, some tree leaves rustling or whatever. When the music comes in, a lot of times we will take that ambient and we will lower it dramatically underneath the music, because now we want the music to be heard, and everything else is going to sort of get in the way of that. And so we look for these places where we can um, inconspicuously move sounds in and out of each other, if that makes sense. Another example that I could tell you was when I worked on the second Transformers movie, Revenge of the Fallen, and I remember there was a scene where a helicopter flies in from one side of the screen, and then the Transformer transforms on the right side of the screen. And when I was working on the show and I was looking at what had already been mixed at that point, you could see the helicopter come in and you can see the sound of the helicopter literally vanish completely. Like they just dove it out just in time for this transformer to transform. And what happens psychologically is you've heard the helicopter, you've established the helicopter. You don't need to have that thumping going constantly through the whole thing, because now we want you to look over there at that robot transforming. So we'll dive out of the helicopter in such a way that you think you still hear it, but the reality is it's no longer there, because your attention is diverted to this other giant robot that's moving, and we want you looking at that, and so we're going to make you hear that and direct your eye over to that part of the screen.
Okay, that's really cool. It's like another peek behind the curtain for people who love movies and how movies are made. The reality you're creating isn't meant to be reality. You're meant
Right.
to show what the movie's trying to show, or the TV show, whatever.
Right, of course. We're telling a story. So we are cutting and choosing our sound effects based on, what's necessary for the plot, what's necessary, and really what's necessary for how we want the audience to feel. And I don't necessarily mean emotionally. That's usually kind of the purview of the music, is the more emotional sound element. By, if we put you in any location, say again the woods, like how the sounds that we choose is based on how we want these woods to feel. Are they peaceful and tranquil? Is the character sitting there reflecting or meditating or whatever, or is it more of a horror movie and we want them to be uncomfortable and we want there to be little critters on the other side of any given tree and we want the audience to thus be on the edge of their seat? We'll pick the sounds, and it could be the same shots in the same location, and we will choose those sounds based on how we want you to feel.
It's such a cool, subtle. I'm going to use the word manipulation, but I don't mean it in a bad way, because
Oh,
that's
it's
what you're
definitely
trying
that.
to do.
Yeah, no, there is definitely that, and there's a lot of conversations that we have about a filmmaker might say to me, does that work? And it's like, okay, well, maybe. What effect are you trying to achieve? Um, because they'll say like, "Hey, can you make that sound louder?" And we go louder, and it's like, "Does that work?" And it's like, "Well, what do you want to have happen here? Do you want us to jump out of our seat?" In which case, yeah, that works. It's loud enough. It's a big sudden thing, and we'll jump out of our seat. If you don't want that, then no, maybe we should pull back on that sound. Sound is very subjective, and the way the balance happens is also very subjective. And you will find from filmmaker to filmmaker, their style is very, very different. Just two contrasting examples. I worked on a TV show years ago called Fear Itself, and even within that show, one episode the director didn't want to hear any of the foley, so the footsteps and the hand pats and the plates going down the glasses. He wanted all that stuff really, really low. And then I'll never forget this, but Stuart Gordon was the director on another episode, on the next episode that we did. And I had mixed all this stuff really low. I kind of thought that might be the style of the show. And he just looked at me and he said, "Ethan, subtlety is a word I do not know. Make everything louder." And so, yeah, we went through another pass and we had to make everything louder. And so every show is different. Every filmmaker is different. Every producer is different when it comes to TV. So you're always doing this little dance of trying to find the spot where it feels right to the filmmaker.
Yeah. Okay. That
Eh,
makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
and we're trusting them and our own instincts, but we're really trusting the filmmaker to know what their audience wants and how they want their audience to feel. And if they're able to put themselves in the place of their audience and say, yes, like that feels right, I think we're okay. Then that's what we end up going with.
Yeah. That's really it's really cool, and I know now going forward watching stuff I'm going to be very hyper aware of it.
Yeah, there's definitely some tricks. I mean, hopefully, even if you're trying to concentrate, you don't notice. Like
Yeah, that's a good point.
we are part of my attraction to it anyway is if you don't notice what I'm doing, then I did a good job.
Yeah, yeah.
With some exceptions, there's some like crazy creative sound stuff that you'll see, especially in I don't know, say a Star Wars something or Dune more recently, where you're on this other world and everything is so alien to you, I mean, quite literally, that you your attention is called to the fact like that sounds really, really cool. Most of the time, though, like aside from those exceptions, like we don't really want you to notice what we're doing. If you're noticing us, then you're not paying attention to the movie, and we've
Mhm.
lost you at that point.
You mentioned like your Transformers example with the helicopter coming in one side and the Transformer on the other, and one kind of fades as the other one starts.
Mhm.
Would your departments also be responsible for like a surround sound mix?
We prepare it so that the mixers can make those decisions as to where in the room things will go. There's a little bit of a gray area now with the technology allows the editors to make a lot of those decisions, and we will do stuff where we will pan things um, accordingly, and hopefully it saves the mixers time. It kind of depends on the mixer. Some mixers love it because then they don't have to do it and they can spend their time doing something else. Some mixers hate it because they're convinced it's never right and they just want to do it themselves. Uh, so it kind of depends from project to project who gets to do stuff like that. In general, that is the domain of the re-recording mixer, is to decide where in the room they want to hear things. If I, as the supervising sound editor, have a very specific idea for how I want things to bounce around the room, I will probably pan it, and then I will let them know, "Hey, I did this panning thing that so that I can make this work the way I wanted it to work. At least start there before tweaking it." So there is some give or take, but yeah, by and large, panning and placement of the sounds is the mixer's domain. Um,
Okay.
Placement in the room, placement in sequence in time is my domain.
Hmm.
When I want things to happen is generally the editing part. How it should sound perspective wise in the room is the mixer side.
This is one that we could probably speak for hours just on this alone. So I guess I'm kind of looking for just some information, or maybe you have like a cool example or two. But you mentioned that for every little sound effect, you either have a library, which probably makes things a bit quicker, but you
Hmm.
also said you record some for
Hmm.
that specifically. Do you have like an entire sound studio set up with anything you can imagine to?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, some things are harder than others. Obviously, if we want to do vehicles and record cars or record, say, for example, I'm sure the new Top Gun movie did their own recording of, got newer recordings of fighter planes. Well, we're not putting that in a studio. Like, you're going to have the military involved and permission and go out and they will do field recording. There's a legendary guy in town named John Fasal who is sort of like the premier field recording guy who goes out and does all that. And the Sound Editors Guild recently gave him a lifetime achievement award. And on YouTube there is a video of that their tribute that they made to him, and it has all sorts of footage of him recording just the craziest, wildest stuff. I mean, just like all these microphones surrounding guns and things that he's recording, and cars they'll bring a car into a soundstage, kind of take it apart, take the hood off, take the trunk off or whatever, and they'll set up 20 or 30 microphones around it. So they record every little bit of that car from every perspective that they can. And they'll have all these microphones hooked up to it so they can do maneuvers and things like that, the specific things that they need for the show. On TV shows, we don't usually have the budget to do that sort of thing, so we rely on pre-recorded sound effects libraries that have been either purchased or have been created by other people at the studio that we work for, and so the studio owns them and we have access to them. On a more detailed, smaller scale, we do have a studio that is the Foley studio, which, if you don't know, Foley is where we record sounds in sync to picture. So it's like karaoke for sound effects. So our Foley artist will stand there and will literally walk in time with the actor on the screen. And they'll have a microphone at their feet and they will change their shoes. And their studio has a bunch of pits. That's what they're called. It's a bunch of different surfaces. So if you want to walk on wood, they will go over to a 3 foot by 3 foot square piece of wood and they'll walk on wood. If they want to walk on metal, they have a metal pit. If you want sand, they have a sand pit and a dirt pit and all these different surfaces so that they can recreate any footstep at any given time. And then if you've ever been in a Foley studio, they're always a mess. It's the world's messiest garage. And it's just loaded with junk that they collect that they can use to make all sorts of different sounds. So there might be a rusty car door over here. A lot of them have a bathtub so they can do water splashing around. They'll have all sorts of rusty hinges and things so they can make door creaks and stuff like that. And my Foley team has a really interesting TikTok feed. They post pretty frequently, little 20, 30-second clips of them recording all the crazy sounds. So if you ever want to go look at their TikTok or Instagram, they're at Real Foley Sound, REEL Foley Sound. And that's always a fascinating adventure. I look at it all the time because I try not to know what they use to make the sound. I just want to know if I believe the sound. And the moment I know that it's celery is bones breaking, then like that takes me out of it a little bit. I think it's cool to know, but yeah. So they have a bunch of stuff where you'll see them actually doing the walking footsteps and they'll do fight scenes where they'll be rolling around on the ground and like body falls and grabbing each other and getting all the hand grabs and stuff and things like that. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, it's so crazy, like with how long we've been doing movies, but like I'm trying to think of like the first guy. Like, how does he figure this stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume necessity is the mother of all invention in that case. And Foley is named after a guy. I'm going to pretend it's George Foley, and I could totally be wrong. But Mr. Foley, back in the day, I think was supposedly the first guy who thought of, well, why don't I just record this live to picture? It'll be so much easier. And with things like, like footsteps, if you try to cut them out of a library of pre-recorded sounds, you run into two problems. And one is that it's incredibly tedious to do the editing. Like, we can do it much faster if you just walk in sync to picture than me having to take a step and move it each time in sync to that. But also everybody walks differently. So the steps need to be performed in a way. Like, how do you cut out of a library somebody who's got, a limp? Like it becomes really, really difficult. And what do you do when somebody's running away from somebody and they stumble and trip? Like, it's much easier to just perform it than it is to try and edit it. So that's one of those cases where we'll do live recording of that.
That makes a lot of sense, because also all those factors you mentioned like increase exponentially when it's like, okay, the person has a limp and they're 250 pounds and compared to 180 and they're wearing boots and there's so many variables. It's insane.
Right. Exactly. And the Foley team just looks at it and it is like, okay, this is our monster. And they're in work boots on dirt. Okay. And they just throw their boots on and they know how to walk heavier, and you can look at two people, like my Foley artist is, a tiny woman, and she will walk 300-pound guys, and she knows how to do it. And I've
Mhm.
worked with another Foley artist who's like a 250-pound dude, and he is as light on his feet as anybody you've ever seen. He's like a ballet dancer, and he'll put on high heels, and you know when you listen to it, it's the most elegant sounding woman walking down the street. It's pretty cool. And then there's just a lot of creativity because what you hear isn't necessarily the sound that's being made. We will cheat. The
Yeah.
celery crunching being bones break is the stereotypical example, or dried pasta cracking or something.
Okay. Yeah. I am very curious about. I wanted to ask what are some of your. You would never expect this is how we got that sound, but I don't know if that's going to break the fourth wall too much.
No, it doesn't. I know I did a horror movie years and years ago when I was living in New York still, and we used raw chicken as our gore. We just we bought actually we used both. We used a whole raw chicken and we used a rotisserie chicken, and just like dig your hands into it and get all the good squishies. And then because there's cartilage and stuff, you push hard enough, you get some nice
Crunching and
bone crunching, really, yeah, kind of awful sound. Like I said though, like I as the supervisor, like I don't want to know, because I'm always worried that once I know what they used, then I won't unhear that particular thing, and suddenly it'll sound not real to me, and then I'll end up making them redo it and whatever. Um, but almost very, very, very rarely is the sound that you're hearing exactly the sound of that item in the movie.
that makes sense. I mean, especially for things like bone break, you're not going to break someone's arm to make
Of
a
course not.
movie.
And even things like gunshots, like if you hear a gun in out in the world, like they don't sound as big and huge and bassy and
Mhm.
terrifying as they do, like a 9 millimeter gun sometimes just sounds like there's just a pop.
Yep.
And when you record a microphone of it, it also just sounds like a pop. So we Hollywooded it. We make it a little bit bigger and cooler and scarier and more violent, because we
Right.
can.
Because you're not trying to make a realistic gunshot. You're trying to make a very cool sounding to induce fear or excitement or whatever gunshot.
Right. Yeah. The level of reality also all sort of depends on who you're working with and whatever. But yeah, we get a lot of criticism. Sometimes there's like, that's not what that gun sounds like. It's like, yeah, we know. Um,
Yeah, we shot it. We know.
we're not going for that. And also depending on how sensitive the filmmaker is, we do our research. Like obviously, I'm working on a show called MINX, which takes place in the '70s, and we're not going to have cell phones. We're not, like, there's some things you can't do because then you really destroy the illusion of whatever it is. I did a film where the filmmaker was an ornithologist, and if we ever put a bird that wasn't native to the location that they were shooting in, he would get really upset. And it's like, well, I don't know what native New Orleans birds sound like,
Right.
so like, give me a little direction here. What am I not allowed to use? What should I use? Because I've got a library of thousands and thousands of different kinds of birds. So like, just tell me what birds you want, and we will put those in there. But yeah, for the most part, we're just having fun. We're playing around.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I could probably deep dive on this all day, but I don't want to eat up your entire afternoon. So we probably should get to some of the projects you've done because you've done some really cool ones.
Yeah, hit me.
Well, you just mentioned Minx, which I think is your latest that's out in the world, or
Yeah,
one of them.
that we just finished our run. We just got announced for a season 2, which is awesome. Yeah, that's on HBO Max. Workplace comedy, with some adult themes.
Some,
And
yeah.
yeah, yeah, there's a little bit of nudity. but I love that show. It's funny, and I love the period that we're working in, and it's just been a real joy to like look at and add sound and realism to that show.
Do you have to approach something set in the 1970s different than you would something like in 2022?
Um, yeah, in the sense that you just have to be careful of what creeps in. So for example, like we have these sound effects libraries and they don't really tell you necessarily what period they're supposed to replicate. They will just say what they are. So, for example, we might be in an office and you listen to the chatter of the people and okay, that sounds right. And we did a search for office with manual typewriters, say, because obviously they didn't have computers everywhere, so you can't have keyboards, you had to have
Mhm.
typewriters. And we find a sound, and it's like, okay, they're good, there's manual typewriters, but then all of a sudden somewhere in there you might hear a digital phone ring because the sound was actually from the 80s. um, or you might hear like a dot matrix printer or something that wasn't native to the 70s, and then you have to go and sort of edit around that or find a different sound. Obviously with things like traffic sounds, we can't have electric vehicles rolling around the streets of LA, so you find traffic sounds that are more throatier, that are more V6 V8 gas guzzling cars. We can't even today, like you can record an LA street and it'll sound a lot like a 70s street because what you're hearing is still primarily the gas powered cars,
Mhm.
but they're a little bit cleaner sounding. The engines are a little bit nicer, and then
Yeah.
you get a bus roll by, and out here in LA, all the buses are electric or natural gas powered, so they have a very different sound. It's like, well, we can't have that bus going by. So that's where you just have to be careful when you're thinking about things. And then we do a lot of separate voice recording of groups of people. So we can have on MINX especially, we were very sensitive to gender roles in our environment. So when you're in an office, you're not going to have a woman calling out like she's the boss of the place. It just wouldn't have happened in the places that we're going. So we need to kind of make sure it's like, okay, women, you're gonna when you speak more as if you're assistants or secretarial, and we'll leave the men to do the boss stuff. Um, and it's very subtle. Again, like I don't know that when you watch the show, I don't really want you to hear, in most cases, the secretary talking and be like, wow, that secretary they really did a great job getting her to sound right. It's just supposed to feel like a 1970s office space. That's what we're going for.
Yeah, I guess that goes back to what you were saying before, where people not noticing it means you did your job right.
Right.
What if it was a
Um,
woman barking orders? You'd be like, that wouldn't really fit here.
right. And even though those sounds are played at a low enough level where you won't necessarily hear the detail, they do have a texture that is different. If we put a different kind of office in there, it's like the difference between a stockbroker's office during trading time where it's very hectic and very busy will be very different than will have a different sound than another really busy office like a magazine newsroom office. They have very different sounds, even though like in your head you're thinking they are the same level of chaos.
Mhm.
um, but they sound different because the kind of chatter is different. And the words that they're saying don't matter as much as how they're saying it.
Right.
Which is where I think, the term for what that is called Walla Walla. And the old story is that the actors used to just go in there and say Walla 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 Walla, and that's what they were chattering to each other. And these actors are really just making sounds. So you go into a restaurant and they could be talking about the most ridiculous thing in the world, but as long as they sound like they're rich people at a high end, Michelin star restaurant, like whatever, talk about whatever you want.
Yeah.
They don't usually. They try to keep conversations germane to the environments because it helps them perform it better. But
Plus, you don't want
yeah,
a word to jump out or something through the
right,
jar.
exactly. So yeah, like if we were, on a show like Minx in the 70s, if we were talking about baseball, they better not mention the Colorado Rockies or something because that wasn't there. We actually had scenes in MINX at an airport, and we had to do a redo because we realized we were doing airport PA systems, like announcements. And we realized that the scene was after the first pass, the scene was in the Burbank airport. And at the time, they were not a national airport. They didn't have national routes. So you couldn't say flight such and such to New York. We had to keep it sort of regional. So it was like flight 102 to Phoenix or Salt Lake City or Seattle or something like that. So yeah, there are those little details that we do pay attention to, and we make mistakes and then go back and fix it just in case somebody decides to deep dive and really listen.
Right.
to
Trying to take you down on the internet.
Yes. Yeah, the internet is a little bit of a curse in that regard. You can't get away with many mistakes.
Yeah. Is something like that. I mean, obviously you want to do your job as accurately as possible. Is something like Burbank being regional, not national, is that something that you or your department caught, or is that like a script supervisor, or is there someone whose job is to listen to the background?
Well, it wasn't me that caught it. I shouldn't admit that publicly. I should totally take the credit. But in that session, there's me and there's my what's called an ADR editor, who's one of my crew, who's going to end up putting all of those recordings together. I was directing the session. We had a producer on there, and then we had, I believe, 6 actors in that group, and one of us realized that somebody said something about flying to like Boston or something like that, and it was like, I don't think Hollywood Burbank Airport was flying to Boston at the time. It was like, okay, well, let's go back and we'll flag that, we'll edit it out, and we'll re-record something else for that spot. So yeah, like somebody caught it, which is good.
Yeah. Your job just sounds like you have to have attention to detail.
Yeah, very much. And we have a decent sized crew. I manage, just on the editorial side, I think about 8 people depending on the show. And then it goes through these layers of quality control. So my editors will put everything together and they send it to me, and then I listen to it. And then after I listen to it, it goes to the mixers and they get their ears on it, and they will hear things that might not be right, that maybe I missed, that my editors missed, because there's so many things and we're just whittling down the number of errors that happen. And then we do a playback for our post-production producer, and they get their ears on it. And then we do a playback for the picture editor, who knows the show probably better than anybody. And they get their ears on it and they give us notes. And then we do another playback for the executive producers, who are, the top creatives, and they get their notes. And then depending on the show, like for our HBO shows, HBO then listens to it, and they have their creative executives there who put their ears on it and they send us their notes. And then it goes literally to a place called QC, who then listens to it really for technical things to make sure, like if there's a sync issue or there's some weird digital noise that got introduced somewhere during the process, and they will make sure that it is ready for air. And so they do a QC pass. So it goes through all these steps. And as a writer that I once worked for used to say, because I think the internet was complaining about an episode, and he's like, when we get a draft of a script, there's 150 things that need to be fixed. But we can only, the fact that we fixed 100 of them is pretty impressive.
Right.
There's still 50 things that are wrong, and yeah, we know that they're not exactly right, but we had other priorities to get the thing out there. And so that is kind of what we're doing, is we're taking this. It's not even in sound. It's not even a blank slate. We don't have a blank canvas because we have dialogue. And we're taking the dialogue and we have to fix all the little mistakes and errors, or they're not mistakes, they're just anomalies that occur, and make it as clean as humanly possible. And some things we can't fix, and other things we don't fix because it's better to keep the line and the performance that we had and leave whatever that thing, that knock in the background is, and just people won't notice because it works better for the show.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just whittle down the amount of errors that are there until you have a show that should, by and large, most people won't notice the things that are still mistakes that I would say, well, we should have fixed that.
Yeah.
Most people won't notice those.
It's too many moving parts to.
It's too many moving parts, and you're engrossed in the story. And once you're involved in the story, like, we could get away with murder.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like even the Burbank airport announcing a flight to New York, I feel like even if somebody lived in the 70s and knew, is that really taking you out of the story that much?
Right. And like I said before, like, if you hear that and notice that and like spend the time now thinking about the fact that we made that mistake, well, we've lost you
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a good point. You weren't that into the story.
Right. So I don't want to say like a lot of decisions get made based on that criteria, but it's kind of like how we know where we are is if you can sit back and say, what do we think the audience is going to notice here? And with TV, it's a little bit hard. You have to put yourself in the position of the audience. With features, especially bigger ones, they actually do audience screenings. And so we will learn directly from people who will tell us, this didn't work for me. And so, when I work with first time filmmakers, there's always a point where they're always on edge because it's their first movie. And if like this one isn't perfect, they might never get to make another movie again. And so they're always kind of like, how do I know? How do I know? How do I know? And it's like, put it in front of people. Like, an audience will tell you very clearly whether or not they're into the movie, and what parts of the movie they were into. You just feel it. When you sit in a movie theater, what if the movie's boring, that the audience isn't into it. Like, you can hear people fidgeting around and stuff. So at a certain point, yeah, put it in front of an audience and you'll know what you can get away with.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's the only litmus test because that's what it's ultimately for.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you're making the movie just for you, I mean, we could spend 50 years fixing stuff.
Right.
But like, we don't. It's there's just too much money and time and energy spent on it to make it just for us. So we have to put it out there.
And I have to imagine that list of 150 corrections, just as an example you had. By the time you get to number 101, are you starting to hit diminishing returns where it's like, yeah, maybe that.
There is definitely a phenomenon that we experience a lot where we say we're not making it better, we're just making it different.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, like I said at the beginning, sound is very subjective, and it's like, what is right might be different for you than it is for me. Our instincts about it and how we feel about it might be different. So at a certain point, like, we will pause and be like, we can make this fix. But it's kind of cosmetic, and I don't know that it's changing the movie anymore. Like, if we're not making the movie better, then maybe we should just leave it and go address some other problem where we can actually make the movie better.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And it's just a thing. Everybody has their own hangups, and most of the time it's very apologetically so, where a producer will be like, I'm sorry, like, I know we've already changed this sound 6 times, I still hate it, like, can we find, and they will even say, I know this doesn't affect anything, but I can't watch the movie right now knowing that this sound is the way it is, and so we will have to try and find another one. My showrunner on one show used to say, how am I going to feel when I'm in the nursing home watching this show back? And that was sort of his criteria for knowing whether or not it was right, is if he thought it would bother him in 25 years when he was retired,
He had to
then
fix it.
yeah, he had to fix it. And yeah, it's a lot of people in the room just kind of like talking to each other, being like, I think you're okay. Like, I don't think anybody's gonna I think this is only going to bother you. And then sometimes they'll be like, yeah, you're right, let's let it go. But sometimes they'll be like, I know, but it's really going to bother me. So like, let's try and fix it. And that's what we end up being there for.
It's cool. It's very cool. It sounds exhausting in a way, but in a really great way, because if you didn't exist, then every show we have would be hollow and empty. So
yeah, if yeah, it's less exhausting than you think. It kind of depends on I mean, one, the number of hours that you're doing obviously makes a difference. If we're doing 18-hour days, that becomes exhausting very quickly. If the show is really, really loud, it becomes exhausting very quickly. So when I was mixing, say, for example, The Flash, I was doing The Flash and Supergirl and NCIS New Orleans all at once. And all three of those shows were very loud. There were not a whole lot of breaks where, you just sat in a quiet room and watched a conversation for a while. And so by the ends of those days, I was really tired most of the time. Um, just because you're going back and forth and it's just like, there goes the Flash running out again, and there goes somebody and he's punching people, and we're going to watch him punch people for an hour right now, and we're just going to go back and forth and rewind and play it again and rewind and play it again and rewind and play it again. And yeah, at a certain point it's just like, I can't listen to them punching each other anymore. Can we do something else? And you go on to another scene, and then you come back later because it's like, I never got that part right, I need to go back to it, but I needed a break for my ears for a second. So that gets tiring. The creative conversations rarely get tiring unless one of the people in the room is kind of being a jerk about it, which happens. And that kind of sucks. Most of the time, though, I've been very, very fortunate that I'd say 95% of the creatives and the people that I've worked with are really cool, and they understand what it is we're trying to do, and they understand that we're all trying to do it together. And so while there are often disagreements, there's never, very rarely is there any animosity. And it's kind of just like, hey, can we try this thing? And it's like, yeah, sure. No, that didn't work. Can we try this other thing? So yeah, sure. And we go do that. And as long as the process is like that, and it's sort of like um, an understanding that we are just here to try stuff. And it's very experimental because, like I said, it's very subjective. And sometimes, like, you just don't know. And you just have to keep trying it until you hit the one that's just like, yeah, that's the one. That's the thing that's going to work. I really like what we did there. Moving on.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned The Flash and Supergirl, because I definitely wanted to ask about your work in the Berlantiverse. And just, I have so many more specific questions on the sound thing, but like I said, we're covering this in 45 minutes to an hour instead of a master's course. But
well, we'll just have to do another one. That's fine.
I'm definitely up for that. That sounds awesome. Do you have time to dip into the Berlantiverse a little bit?
Yeah. What I can, yeah, hit me.
Well, you mentioned Flash and Supergirl. Mm-hmm. Were you on any of the other shows?
I mixed season 1 of Doom Patrol.
Okay.
I mixed here and there some episodes of Legends of Tomorrow. And of course we were involved in the crossovers. So there was a lot of, suddenly finding superheroes in my show that I didn't know who they were. I mean, right now I'm doing Riverdale, which isn't the Berlanti superhero verse, but
it's Berlanti. Yeah.
It is Berlanti. And I also do You, which is also Berlanti. My first Berlanti show was the Tomorrow People.
Okay.
Which goes back, I think, even pre-Arrow. So I think it was pre the Arrowverse. But then we did a bunch of them. We sort of helped get them started. So like, I didn't mix Legends of Tomorrow. I filled in on a couple of episodes when one of the mixers had a scheduling conflict or was sick or something. But we did the pilot for that. It wasn't really a pilot. It was like a 3-minute trailer or sizzle reel, I think is what they called it. I did the same thing. I did the Black Lightning pilot, but I didn't mix the show. But they were always mixing next door. So, we kind of know everybody that's involved, and sort of, it's sort of one big family there. But I did the Flash for the first 5 seasons.
Oh, wow. Great.
I don't remember when I left the Flash to do Riverdale. I don't remember if we were in the middle of if I got through season 6 or if I just got through season 5. I'd have to look it up, to be honest. And Supergirl, same thing. So Supergirl would have been 1 year less because we started Supergirl in season 2 of the Flash. And I left both of those at the same time. I went from being a re-recording mixer to being supervising sound editor on Riverdale. So I made sort of like a mini internal career change.
Doing a superhero type show rather than something like MINX, which is it's set in the real world, even if it's not true life and all that. Is the job much different?
Yes. Yes, in the sense of, we're not playing with reality. So now we really can do whatever we want. You're not speaking a language that everybody knows when, you have a guy who turns into mist. I don't know what that sounds like. Right. Like nobody else does either. So in terms of that, there's a little more pressure, especially on a TV show. You kind of have to get it right on the first try. And with that's very, very hard. Because if you don't get it right, redoing it in the time frame that we have is very challenging. And there have been times where we didn't get it right. And those times suck because you kind of have to remix, and you have to redesign and then remix every time that villain is in the show. And the unfortunate thing is, and I think on a lot of like the bigger, like the huge shows and on features, you're involved way earlier than you get to be in TV. So, on, for example, the Transformers movies, the editorial crew, they were on it for 10 months.
Wow.
So they had the opportunity, they could build a library, they can audition it before stuff was even shot, based on concept art, for example. Like it'd be like, okay, yeah, I think I have some ideas for how this robot should transform or whatever. And then you can make little tweaks after that, but at least you have the broad thing. A movie I did, we had that luxury. I did a movie called Revolt, which is sort of an indie sci-fi action movie where alien robots come to Earth and destroy the Earth. And I was involved with that because the director is an old friend of mine from film school. And so I was involved in that from concept stage, where he had to do what's called a proof of concept. He did a little like 2.5 minute demonstration of what the movie might look like when it gets made. And I did the sound for that. And so we were able to already have these conversations about what these robots should sound like literally years before the movie got made. So when the movie did get made, we already had a template for how these things were going to be. And we had to make adjustments because the robots did change in design from the proof of concept to the final movie. So we made some adjustments, but they were relatively minor adjustments. We still knew why the robots were there, what they were going to do, and kind of a general sense of, what their powers were. And we had those elements already there. On the Flash and Supergirl, we didn't really get that time. So the picture editors would cut in some temps. That was sort of a guide. And it's like, okay, well, we know that this guy's going to turn into mist. So we have libraries of things that we've used for misty, airy, breathier type sounds. And, we'll at least be in the ballpark. And then we have to tweak it for what the visual effects actually look like.
Okay.
So yeah, that in that sense, it's really hard. On a show like MINX, what you see is what you get.
Right.
Like,
yeah. I'm cloth cars.
Yeah. I'm looking at this office. I'm seeing everybody moving around. I know what kind of office this is. Okay. I can build stuff because I know what it's going to look like. On the Flash and Supergirl with the visual effects, a lot of times when we start, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And then we do our first pass of the mix, a lot of times to grayscale animations. Sometimes it's like a little stick figure that just moves across the screen. And a lot of times it's even just a text. It says, this villain's going to do this thing on this shot. And it's just a black screen and text. And we're just like, I got nothing. And so the sound effects editor would put a sound in there. And it's like, this is clearly a placeholder. And then when we would get the shot, then we'd see it and be like, oh, okay. Yeah, we got to change all this.
Yeah.
No, that is not at all what I thought that was going to be. And so it's harder in that sense. Every show is it's challenging.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. MINX has its own difficulties for certain, or challenges. On that one, yeah, there's definitely the challenge of I have no idea where we're going to be 3 days from now until we see the shot. And so, ultimately it's just like, you just look at the producers and they all know, it's like, don't even work on it. Like, we won't give you any notes on it because we don't know what it's going to be and you don't know what it's going to be. So when we see it, we'll know.
That makes sense. Yeah. When you do a superhero pilot or like the sizzle reel for Legends of Tomorrow, not only is it tough for you to do your immediate job where, okay, what does this thing that doesn't have a sound because it doesn't exist sound like? Is there the extra added pressure of like, you're also setting a precedent that this thing, every time it happens, will sound this way?
Yeah, on the sizzles, not so much because it's not a full episode that you want to air. On a pilot, yeah, for sure. Like if we do a full pilot. So I didn't do the Flash pilot. I didn't do the Supergirl pilot either. We ended up doing the show. And so there was a lot of signature sounds that were established in the pilot that even if I wanted to tweak, I couldn't really. Because it's like, that's what the Flash sounds like. That's what's in the show. So we're going to roll with that. And, we have the sounds and we're going to just modify them for each of the Flash's actions every time he ends up doing stuff. So yeah, when you do a pilot, I think there is very much a conscious pressure, not just on us, but on the filmmakers themselves to be like, the sound of the Flash is hopefully going to occur 20 times an episode for the next 200 episodes. Should probably make sure that that's a good sound.
Yeah. Can't rub you the wrong way after 50 times.
Yeah. No, I mean, you do have some flexibility in the sense that a pilot that gets made is never what actually airs on the final thing. So if they came back and said, we really hate the sound, the way the Flash sounds, we could have done something differently. But we didn't. It was like, that sound is approved. They love it. Don't touch it. It's like, okay. So
right.
we don't touch it. But yeah, I'm sure the pressure, the pressure on a pilot is very unique, all the way across the board, not just because you're establishing the world and you want to make sure that you establish it in a way that can carry over for the next however many episodes the show goes, but also because the show might not go. And everything has to be right. And it kind of has to be perfect. And you get one shot at making an episode of a show that somebody then has to say, congratulations, you get to make 9 more or 13 more or 20 more. And it's all based on that one. And so the stakes are super high and the pressure, especially on the producers, and pilots always end up being super long hours. You end up redoing things over and over again. We do, I mentioned all the passes of QC that we did on a normal TV show, double that for a pilot. Because we will do the whole process and then they will make picture changes and reshoot scenes and come back and we'll do the whole process again on the same show because they need to make sure that it is as good as it possibly can be so that if it doesn't get picked up, at least we know it was the best that it could be.
Right. Yeah. You gave it every shot possible to succeed.
Yeah. And that difference, those changes you never know. Those changes might make the difference between getting picked up and not getting picked up. So,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. That was, I was just going to say, so the pressure is super, super high.
It sounds like it. Yeah, it must be. So does that mean that Flash episode 1 and Flash episode 100 is like a totally different game? because you've established so much of the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, eventually you get into a process. So things tend to be much smoother. And you can anticipate where the notes are going to come from. So, by that point, we understand the style of the executive producers, we understand the style of the post-production producers, so we're able to dig in and mold the show to their tastes before they come in. So as you go, in theory, the notes that you get really by episode 4 or 5 should be degrees less than what you got on episodes 1, 2, and 3. um there's always this feeling out process of what do they like, and then everybody kind of makes this adjustment, and by the time you get to episode 100 your process is pretty well established. So on the Flash, for example, we knew we were going to get this far on day 1 of our mix, we were going to get this far on day 2 of our mix, and then we were going to do this stuff on day 3 of the mix, and we had a process and we knew how those 3 days when we mixed it were going to go. And then we also knew, okay, at some point on Friday we're going to get more visual effects shots, so we're prepared for the fact that on Friday we're going to come back in and we're going to do these other things. So we know, like on day 3, which might have been Wednesday, it'd be like, okay, well, we're not going to tweak this stuff because on Friday we're going to get new versions of those shots. So let's just wait until Friday until we get them. And you get this process. So by episode 100, there's not many surprises that happen. Sometimes there are, but there's not many. Sometimes you find out that they just want reshot scenes in an episode, and it's just like, oh, we haven't done that in the past 4 years, but okay, we're going to do that for this one. Sure. It happens. You're always on your toes.
Always something different. Yeah, that's probably, I was saying before, the job sounds exhausting. That's the part of the job that's probably exciting. You never show up to the office like, here we go again, same thing.
Oh yeah, you're never bored. And even on TV, I think even on shows that you might think would be boring for sound, because on TV you're always in the same locations. Generally you're with the same people. The Flash or Supergirl, we had a different villain every week. So like there was always something crazy that was brand new, that we had to make up from scratch. On Riverdale, another example of a show where every episode something just like batshit crazy happens in every episode of that show. So like you get it and it's just like, okay, so what am I doing for this one? Yeah, that's not anything we've done in the past 100 episodes. Okay. So you're never bored. But even on the shows on dramas where it is the same thing every week, there's always new problems to solve. That's what we do. We're problem solvers, and there's always going to be a problem that we have to fix. So yeah, it never gets boring. Even on the boring shows, it's never boring.
That's very cool. Well, Ethan, I appreciate you taking the time. I know I told you half an hour and we're at an hour, but I really appreciate you hanging in there because it was fascinating.
I do this all the time.
Awesome.
I never stick to the script.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I found it really enthralling. I'm sure our watchers will too, because we all love movies and TV, so to get that much deeper is excellent.
Yeah, and if you ever want to do a deep dive on the process itself, let me know. I'm more than happy to come back and show you sort of the nuts and bolts and lift the veil, so to speak.
Yeah, we'll definitely be hitting you up for that, because I think it'd be really cool to go real specific and just keep drilling down.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have anything you want to plug or socials you want to point people to or anything?
If anybody has any questions, my Twitter is at High Five Audio, all spelled out, HIGHFIV audio. I think my DMs are open if you have questions or any aspiring sound people or filmmakers or anything like that. Those are open. And then I'd say watch MINX. I think it's a great show. I'm doing a new version of Pretty Little Liars that'll come out on HBO Max in July. So I hope everyone just watches and enjoys the work.
Very cool. Well, Ethan, thanks again. And it sounds like you're doing great. So just keep going.
I got to get to an ADR session now.
Oh, awesome.
All right. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.